little fox.
Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 13. Anne in Trouble Again. Marilla walked home one late April evening and realized happily that winter was over. She looked affectionately at Green Gables and looked forward to a warm fire and a cup of tea with Anne. When she got home, the fire wasn't lit, and there was no sign of Anne anywhere. Marilla was disappointed and irritated. By the time Marilla got dinner ready, it was dark, and Anne had still not come home. Marilla went upstairs and found Anne lying on the bed, face down among the pillows.
"My goodness,"
said the astonished Marilla.
"have you been asleep, Anne?"
"No,"
was the muffled reply.
"Are you sick then?"
asked Marilla anxiously. Marilla moved closer to the bed.
"No, but please, Marilla, go away and don't look at me. I'll never be able to go anywhere again."
"Anne Shirley, what's the matter?"
said Marilla. Anne turned over.
"Look at my hair, Marilla,"
she whispered. Marilla lifted her candle and looked closely. Anne's hair certainly looked very strange.
"Anne, what have you done? Why, your hair is green."
And it was green. Never in all her life had Marilla seen anything so ugly as Anne's hair at that moment.
"Yes, it's green.
Moaned Anne.
I thought nothing could be as bad as red hair, but now I know it's 10 times worse to have green hair."
"Anne,"
Marilla said,
"I've been expecting something to happen because you haven't done anything strange for 2 months. How did your hair turn green?"
"I dyed it."
"Dyed it? You dyed your hair?"
Marilla looked at Anne sternly.
"Well,"
continued Marilla sarcastically,
"I would have dyed it a decent color at least. I wouldn't have dyed it green."
"He said it would turn my hair a beautiful raven black,"
protested Anne.
"Who said that?"
"The peddler that was here this afternoon. I bought the dye from him."
"Anne Shirley, this is what your vanity has done. Now give your hair a good wash."
Marilla said. Anne washed her hair, but it made no difference.
"Oh, Marilla, what can I do? People have forgotten my other mistakes. Shouting at Mrs. Lynde, making Diana drunk, jumping on Miss Barry, and cracking a slate on Gilbert Blythe. But they'll never forget this one."
For the next week, Anne went nowhere and washed her hair every day. At the end of the week, Marilla said firmly,
"It's no use, Anne. Your hair must be cut off."
Anne nodded and wept. Marilla's haircut was very thorough, and the result was not pretty. Anne's hair was quite short, and it made a sensation in school on Monday. But to her relief, nobody guessed the real reason behind her haircut. However, Josie Pye did tell Anne she looked like a scarecrow. A few weeks later, the girls were standing at the brook. In the brook was a small boat. It was Anne's idea that they act out a poem.
"You must be the Lily Maid, Anne,"
said Diana.
"I'm not brave enough to float down the river." "But it's ridiculous to have a red-headed Lily Maid,"
said Anne.
"Your hair is much darker since you cut it,"
said Diana earnestly.
"Really?"
exclaimed Anne, flushing with delight. Then she went back to deciding the parts for their skit.
"I'll be the Lily Maid,"
she agreed reluctantly.
"Ruby, you be King Arthur, and Diana must be Lancelot."
Anne lay down in the boat, closed her eyes, and folded her hands on her chest.
"She really looks dead,"
whispered Ruby Gillis. Instead of lilies, Diana placed a posy of violets in Anne's hands.
"Now she's ready,"
said Ruby. The girls kissed the Lily Maid and pushed the boat off. For a few minutes, as the boat slowly drifted, Anne enjoyed the romance of her journey. Then something very unromantic happened. The boat began to leak. The Lily Maid was forced to get up and look at the big crack through which water was pouring. Anne gave a gasping little scream that nobody heard, and then she went pale. But she stayed calm. There was one chance, just one. Anne prayed that the boat would keep drifting toward the bridge and float near one of its columns. The columns were made of old tree trunks with branch stubs that she could sit on. Anne's prayer was answered. The boat drifted under the bridge, and Anne scrambled onto a column. She sat there with no way of getting up or down. The boat kept drifting and then sank. Ruby and Diana waded farther down the brook, and they saw the boat disappear underwater. They went white as sheets, shrieked, and ran off. For the unlucky Lily Maid, the minutes ticked by, each one like an hour. Why didn't someone come? Where had her friends gone? Suppose nobody came. Just when Anne thought she could hold on no longer, Gilbert Blythe rode toward her.
Anne Shirley, how did you get there?
He exclaimed. He helped Anne into his boat. She sat there furious and soaking wet.
What happened?
Asked Gilbert.
We were playing and I was the Lily Maid.
Anne said, not even looking at Gilbert.
I had to float to Camelot, down the brook. The boat leaked and I had to get out. Can you row me to the bank?
Asked Anne. Gilbert obliged.
I'm very grateful,
said Anne haughtily.
Anne,
he said quickly.
I'm sorry I made fun of your hair. It was only a joke. Besides, it was so long ago. Can't we be friends?
For a moment, Anne hesitated. Her heart gave a strange, quick little beat. But then the scene of 2 years ago flashed in her head like it had happened yesterday. She hated Gilbert Blythe. She would never forgive him.
No,
she said coldly.
I will never be friends with you, Gilbert Blythe.
All right.
Gilbert went down to his boat, his cheeks red.
I'll never ask you to be friends again, Anne Shirley. And I don't care either.
He rode away furiously. As Anne walked home, she held her head high, but she was conscious of an odd feeling, regret. Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 14, The Queen's Class. Marilla put her knitting on her lap. Her eyes were tired again. Anne was curled up on the rug in front of the fire. Marilla looked at her with tenderness. Anne had no idea of how much Marilla loved her. Anne sometimes thought Marilla was hard to please and lacked understanding, but she always stopped that thought and remembered what she owed to Marilla.
Anne,
Marilla said abruptly.
Miss Stacy was here this afternoon.
Was she? Why?
Asked Anne.
She came to talk about you,
answered Marilla.
About me?
Anne looked rather scared. Then she flushed and exclaimed,
Oh, I know what she said. I meant to tell you, Marilla. Honestly, I did, but I forgot. Miss Stacy caught me reading Ben-Hur in school when I should have been studying Canadian history. I was reading it at lunch and was at the chariot race when lunch ended. I was dying to know what happened. So I opened my history book and put Ben-Hur on my lap. It looked like I was studying history. I was so interested in it that I never noticed Miss Stacy looking down at me. I was very ashamed, Marilla, especially when I heard Josie Pye giggling.
Marilla listened with a frown.
Miss Stacy didn't mention that, Anne. It's just your guilty conscience. Miss Stacy wants to organize a class of students to study for the entrance exam of Queen's College. She asked Matthew and me if we would like you to join it. Would you like to go to Queen's College and become a teacher, Anne?
Oh, Marilla!
Anne got up from the rug.
I'd love to be a teacher, but isn't it expensive?
Don't worry about that,
Marilla said.
Education is important, for girls as much as boys.
Oh, thank you, Marilla. I'll study as hard as I can, though I warn you not to expect much in geometry,
Anne said. The Queen's class was organized. Gilbert Blythe, Anne Shirley, Ruby Gillis, Josie Pye, and Charlie Sloane joined. Diana Barry did not, as her parents did not intend to send her to Queen's College. It was the first time that Diana and Anne had been separated in anything. When the Queen's class stayed after school for extra lessons, Anne saw Diana leave slowly with the others. A lump came into Anne's throat, and she hid behind her Latin book to hide the tears in her eyes. She would never let Gilbert Blythe or Josie Pye see those tears. Anne enjoyed the Queen's class very much. She chatted away to Marilla.
Jane and Ruby are studying to be teachers. Ruby says she'll study for 2 years and then get married. Jane says she'll never marry because you are paid for teaching, but a husband won't pay you anything.
What is Gilbert Blythe going to be?
Asked Marilla.
I don't know what Gilbert's ambition is, if he has one,
said Anne scornfully. Since the day Gilbert had rescued Anne from the bridge and she had not forgiven him, Gilbert had steadily ignored Anne. He talked and joked with the other girls, and sometimes walked them home, but he simply ignored Anne, and Anne found that it was not pleasant to be ignored. Mrs. Lynde came to Green Gables one afternoon to find out why Marilla had not come to visit her.
Matthew had chest pains,
Marilla explained.
and I thought I shouldn't leave him. He's all right now, but he gets chest pains more often. Sit down, Rachel. Will you stay for tea?
Mrs. Lynde and Marilla ate some biscuits Anne had made. Mrs. Lynde thought the biscuits were delicious. Anne has turned out to be a real smart girl, admitted Mrs. Lynde. She must be a great help.
She is,
said Marilla.
and she's steady and reliable too. I was afraid she'd never stop her daydreaming, but she has. I trust her with anything now.
Mrs. Lynde continued. Yes, she really improved these 3 years, especially in looks. You could even say she's pretty. Anne enjoyed her vacation thoroughly. She and Diana spent most of the time outdoors, walking, rowing, and wandering. When September came, she was ready to study. The Queen's exam loomed. Anne had a nightmare where she was staring at the pass list for the exam. Gilbert's name was on top, and her name was absent. The school year passed quickly. Soon June came, and the Queen's exams were held in Charlottetown.
Dearest Diana,
Wrote Anne in a letter back home to her friend.
today we had the history and geometry exam. Geometry was hard. Josie Pye said the geometry was so easy, a 10-year-old could have done it. Oh, Diana, I wish you were here with me.
Anne returned to Avonlea and waited for the results to be published in the newspaper. While she wanted to beat Gilbert Blythe, she also wanted to do well for Matthew and Marilla, especially Matthew, who said she would beat the whole island. That would only happen in her wildest dreams. But she hoped she would be among the top 10 students. Finally, Anne saw Diana racing to Green Gables with a newspaper in her hand. Anne sprang to her feet. The pass list had been printed. Anne's head whirled. Anne, you've passed! Diana cried. Passed first! You and Gilbert both! You've tied! Oh, I'm so proud! Anne grabbed the paper. Yes, she had passed. There was her name at the very top of a list of 200. That moment was worth living for. Everyone from Avonlea had passed. They hurried to tell Matthew and Marilla.
Oh, Matthew,
Exclaimed Anne.
I've passed and I'm first, or one of the first. I'm not vain, but I'm thankful.
Well now, I've always said it.
Said Matthew, gazing at the list happily.
I knew you could beat them all.
You've done pretty well, I must say, Anne.
Said Marilla, trying to hide her extreme pride.
We're all proud of you.